He made me sign a prenup for $0. Months later, I inherited $60 million and left him empty-handed. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never thought I'd be in this situation. I was 28, full of dreams, working hard at my career, and finally thinking I had found someone who understood me. Ryan Mitchell was everything I thought I wanted: charming, successful, and confident. From the start, he made me feel special, like I was the only person who mattered in the room. But soon, I started noticing little things, tiny cracks in the image he presented. The first big red flag came when he brought up a prenup. He said it was normal, just business, he explained. But when I looked at it, I realized it gave me nothing, literally zero. My heart sank. I had always imagined marriage as a partnership, sharing dreams, and building life together. Instead, this felt like a warning, a way to make sure I had no claim if things went wrong. I wanted to trust him, so I signed it, convincing myself that love mattered more than money. But even then, a small part of me felt uneasy. I noticed how he would make decisions without asking me, how he would brush off my opinions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I told myself I was overthinking. I wanted to believe in us, in the life we were building. Still, something about Ryan bothered me. He could be so attentive one moment and distant the next. There were nights I lay awake wondering if he truly cared about me or if he only saw what I could give him. I started to feel a growing tension in my chest, a warning that I couldn't ignore. Despite all this, I tried to focus on the good times, the laughter, the trips, the quiet moments where it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I clung to those moments, hoping they were proof that love could survive the cracks. But deep down, I sensed that the storm was coming, and it would change everything I thought I knew. Little did I know, my life was about to turn in ways I never imagined. The control he thought he had over me, the confidence in his power, all of it was about to be challenged. Something bigger than either of us was about to intervene, and it would shift the balance in ways he could never predict. This is where my story begins, not with the love I thought I had, but with the betrayal I didn't see coming, and the strength I didn't know I had. At first, I tried to ignore the little things Ryan did, but they kept piling up. He would make decisions about our money without asking me, deciding how bills were paid, what we could spend, and even how I should manage my own savings. It wasn't just money, he belittled my dreams too. When I talked about wanting to start a small business, he would laugh it off, saying it wasn't practical or that I didn't have what it took. Every time I tried to share my thoughts, he would dismiss them, often with a smile that didn't feel kind. I found myself torn. Part of me still loved him, wanted to believe in the man I fell for, and hoped these were just minor flaws. But another part of me was uneasy, a small voice in my head whispering that something wasn't right. It was confusing because the charming Ryan, the one everyone admired, was still there, pretending nothing was wrong, hiding the darker side behind his perfect smile. During this time, my friend Maya noticed the changes before I fully admitted them to myself. She sat me down one evening and said, "Olivia, I don't want to scare you, but he's controlling. You might not see it clearly, but you have to pay attention. You're giving him too much power over your life." At first, I resisted. I didn't want to hear that the person I loved could have such intentions. But deep down, I couldn't ignore her words. Ryan's controlling nature wasn't obvious to everyone. Around friends and family, he was charming, funny, and polite. But in private, it was different. He would make subtle comments about how I should act, who I should spend time with, and even what I should wear. He made it sound like he cared, like he was giving advice out of love, but the truth was he was slowly taking control. Despite everything, I wanted to hope. I wanted to believe that our marriage could work, that Ryan could change, or that maybe I was overthinking things. I held on to the good moments we had, the laughter, the quiet evenings together, the promises he made when he looked into my eyes. Even with Maya's warnings and my own growing doubts, I stayed hopeful. I told myself that love could survive challenges, that people weren't perfect, and that maybe I was just imagining the worst. But the uneasy feeling never left me. It lingered quietly, like a shadow I couldn't shake, hinting that the betrayal I feared was closer than I realized. I knew deep down that I had to be careful, that trusting blindly could hurt me more than I was ready for. And yet, I clung to hope, hoping that the man I loved would be the one I thought he was. Ryan brought up the prenup again one evening, his tone casual but firm. "It's just a safety measure, Olivia," he said, smiling as if I should feel reassured. "Nothing personal. We're just protecting ourselves." But the way he said it made it clear it wasn't about protection, it was about control. He wanted to make sure that if anything went wrong, I would have nothing, and he would keep everything. I hesitated, staring at the papers in front of me. Every line seemed designed to strip me of any security, any claim to the life we were building together. My heart ached. I wanted to believe him, to trust that love mattered more than money, but the weight of the agreement pressed down on me. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it felt like a judgment, a declaration that he didn't see me as an equal, that he valued his wealth above our relationship. After long, tense hours, I reluctantly signed. I told myself it didn't matter, that our love would outweigh greed, that the bond between us would be stronger than any contract. I tried to smile, tried to reassure myself that I was doing the right thing, but inside, humiliation and heartbreak gnawed at me. I felt powerless in a way I had never imagined, trapped between hope and fear, love and betrayal. Ryan noticed immediately. There was a subtle shift in him, a satisfaction in his expression that I couldn't miss. He didn't gloat openly, but the way he leaned back, the small smirk on his lips, told me everything. He had won, at least in his mind. He believed he had secured his future and ensured I had nothing. It was a quiet victory for him, a proof of his cleverness and control. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had just happened. I tried to push away the feelings of anger and disappointment, tried to focus on the hope that our love would still matter. But deep down, I sensed that the power balance had shifted, that this wasn't just about money, it was about who controlled whom, and he believed he held all the cards. Even as I fell asleep, a small voice inside me whispered that things wouldn't stay this way forever. That one day, the tables might turn, and the control he thought he had would be challenged. For now, I carried the hurt and the humiliation silently, knowing only that my life, my choices, and my future were more complicated than I had ever imagined. And so, our marriage moved forward with this invisible tension, a silent reminder that Ryan's greed and entitlement were already shaping the course of our relationship, and that the story was far from over. A few months after signing the prenup, I received unexpected news that shook me to my core. A distant relative I barely knew had passed away, and in their will, I was named the sole beneficiary of a fortune worth $60 million. I couldn't believe it at first. My hands trembled as I read the letter over and over, thinking it must be a mistake. It felt unreal, like a dream I wasn't supposed to be living. Anger bubbled up alongside disbelief. How could life be so ironic? Here I was, forced to sign a prenup that left me with nothing, and now I suddenly had more than I had ever imagined. The thought of Ryan, so confident that he had won, made my blood boil. But beneath the anger, a quiet strength began to grow inside me, a realization that I didn't need anyone to define my worth or my future. As I sat in my room, I let myself think clearly for the first time in months. This is my chance. I don't have to play by his rules. I can live on my own terms. I can be strong, independent, and unstoppable. I felt a surge of empowerment I hadn't known before, a sense that the universe had given me a second chance, and this time, I wouldn't let anyone take it away. I decided to keep the inheritance a secret for now. Ryan didn't suspect a thing, and I planned to use this time wisely. I quietly started thinking about my next steps, investments, properties, opportunities one had always dreamed of but never pursued. I imagined the life I wanted, free, successful, and respected. Every idea made me feel more alive, more capable. Meanwhile, Ryan continued as usual, controlling, dismissive, and unaware of the storm that was quietly gathering. He still believed he had the upper hand, that I was powerless. But now, I had an invisible shield, a secret weapon that would soon change everything. Every manipulation, every condescending word he threw my way, only strengthened my resolve. I began planning carefully, not out of revenge yet, but to ensure that my life would no longer be dictated by anyone else. I wanted to rise, to show strength, and to reclaim the dignity he had tried to take from me. I felt a mix of excitement and anticipation, knowing that one day, he would realize the mistake he had made. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't experienced before. I was no longer just the woman Ryan thought he could control. I was Olivia Parker, capable, smart, and unstoppable. And the best part? He had no idea. The power I had long been denied was finally mine, and I intended to use it wisely. Once I realized the full extent of my inheritance, I knew I had to act carefully. I didn't want to rush or show Ryan what I had. Instead, I started asserting myself in small ways, making decisions without asking for his approval, speaking up when I disagreed, and refusing to be dismissed. Each time I stood my ground, I felt more confident, more in control of my life. I also began learning everything I could about money and legal matters. I read books on investments, attended seminars, and spoke with advisors who could help me manage my fortune wisely. I wanted to be smart, strategic, and ready for anything. I wasn't just planning for the present, I was preparing for the future, one where I could never be powerless again. Meanwhile, Ryan started to show cracks. He was overconfident, believing he still had the upper hand, but subtle signs of insecurity began to appear. He would glance at me in ways that suggested he wasn't entirely sure of my reactions anymore. He tried to maintain his charm, but the tension between us was growing, and he could feel it even if he couldn't name it. I began attending exclusive events, pretending they were just social outings. In reality, I was meeting people who could expand my influence: lawyers, investors, business owners. I made connections quietly, smiling politely, never revealing the full extent of my wealth. Each handshake, each conversation, was a step toward ensuring that when the time came, I would have the power to shift everything in my favor. I also used these moments to learn about Ryan indirectly, what he wanted, how he made decisions, and where he thought he had control. The more I observed, the more I realized how blind he had been. His arrogance had made him underestimate me, and that mistake would cost him dearly. Despite keeping everything a secret, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of satisfaction. Every move I made, every connection I forged, was a quiet reminder that I was no longer the powerless woman who had signed that prenup. I was building a life where I called the shots, where I had the final word, and where Ryan's control over me was meaningless. At night, when I was alone, I would think about the future and quietly smile. The tables were turning, slowly but surely. I didn't need to rush or show him yet, he still thought he had won. But I knew better. And when the moment finally came, he would see just how wrong he had been. The game was mine now, and I intended to play it wisely. Ryan loved to show off. He would buy expensive gifts, take me to fancy dinners, and make a show of his wealth as if it was proof of his power. Around him, I could feel the air of arrogance. He treated me like I was secondary, someone who existed to admire him and follow his rules. Every comment, every gesture, reminded me of how little he thought I mattered. I decided to keep my distance. I smiled when I needed to, laughed at his jokes when necessary, but inside, I observed him carefully. I watched how he interacted with others, how he flaunted control, and how blind he was to my quiet transformation. Each display of his arrogance only made me more determined to act wisely. Without him knowing, I began small acts of subtle justice. If he tried to block a business deal I was interested in, I quietly used my connections to ensure it succeeded anyway. If he boasted about controlling a situation, I found a way to change the outcome without confronting him directly. Each time, I felt a small thrill, knowing I was proving my independence while keeping him in the dark. Ryan's ego blinded him. He assumed that everything he did would succeed, that his control was absolute. He didn't notice the confidence growing in me, the skills I was quietly developing, or the influence I was gathering. He still believed he held all the cards, but in reality, he had already underestimated me. Every day, I felt the tension building. I could see it in his eyes sometimes, a flicker of doubt he tried to hide, a hesitation before making a decision, but he quickly masked it with a smile or a joke. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but I noticed. That little crack in his armor gave me hope and fuel for what was coming. As I navigated this carefully, I began imagining the day when I would reveal everything. The day when Ryan's arrogance would meet reality. For now, I let him enjoy his illusion of control, knowing that the timing of my move would make it all the more powerful. Even as he flaunted his wealth and mocked my supposed weakness, I held on to my secret. I had the fortune, the independence, and the plan. And every time he acted like I was nothing, it reminded me of how completely unprepared he was for the moment when the truth would come crashing down. I smiled quietly to myself one evening, thinking about that day. It was approaching, closer than he realized. The tables were shifting, and Ryan's arrogance would be the first thing to fall when my independence and strength finally took center stage. The day everything became real was unforgettable. The legal papers arrived, confirming that I now had full control of the $60 million inheritance. It wasn't just a number on a page, it was freedom, power, and the proof that I could stand on my own. For the first time, I felt completely untied, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. With this new reality, I started living boldly. I bought the home I had always dreamed of, a place that reflected my style and independence. I traveled to cities I had only ever imagined visiting, exploring art, culture, and experiences that opened my mind and reminded me of how much life had to offer. I invested wisely, learning more every day, building security and confidence that no one could take away from me. Ryan noticed the changes almost immediately. Something about me was different, my posture, the way I spoke, the quiet confidence in my eyes, but he couldn't figure out exactly what had shifted. He tried his usual tactics, trying to assert control, testing me with comments and subtle challenges. But this new Olivia was unshakable. His attempts bounced off me, meaningless now, and he didn't know why. I felt a transformation deep inside. The heartbroken, powerless wife who had signed the prenup was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her worth, who had learned patience, strategy, and resilience. Every step I took reflected my independence and growing strength. I no longer felt like I was living someone else's story, I was writing my own, and it was thrilling. Even as I embraced this freedom, I kept Ryan in my orbit, quietly observing. His confusion and subtle frustration amused me, but it also served as a reminder that my time to act had to be precise. The audience can imagine the tension building. He still believed he was in control, while I was quietly preparing to reveal the truth in the most powerful way possible. I would meet people, attend events, and make decisions without consulting him, each action reinforcing my independence. And while he tried to read me, I remained calm, collected, and always a step ahead. The anticipation grew inside me, the moment I would confront him looming closer, like the calm before a storm. At night, when I reflected on everything, I smiled quietly. This wasn't about revenge yet, it was about showing strength, living fully, and preparing for the day when the truth would be undeniable. Ryan had no idea that the woman he thought he controlled had become unstoppable. The final act was coming, and when it did, nothing would be the same. I invited Ryan to a private dinner at a luxury restaurant, making it sound casual. I arrived dressed impeccably, radiating confidence. Every step I took, every smile I gave, was deliberate. I wanted him to see the woman I had become, strong, independent, and untouchable. Ryan walked in expecting the usual timid, compliant Olivia, the one he thought he controlled. He smiled, leaning in as if ready to charm me into his world. But this time I didn't flinch, didn't soften my voice, didn't let him believe he still had power over me. I calmly began telling him about my inheritance, how I now had full control of $60 million. His eyes widened slightly at first, then narrowed in disbelief as he tried to process what I was saying. "You can't be serious," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I continued, explaining that the prenup he had made me sign for nothing now left him empty-handed. I watched as realization dawned, his confidence crumbling into shock. He opened his mouth, trying to argue, to blame, to manipulate, but nothing worked. The power he had assumed was his by default had vanished, and he couldn't do a thing about it. I delivered my final words with calm precision, not anger, not spite, just truth. You wanted control and thought you had won. But life has a way of teaching lessons, and this one was mine to learn, and to use. My voice was steady, every word carefully measured to show triumph without cruelty. Ryan froze, the weight of the moment hitting him. He looked at me, stunned, betrayed, and utterly powerless. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief that he, who had always felt untouchable, could now be left with nothing. The man who tried to control me had no control over the outcome that had already been decided. I stayed composed, letting the silence stretch, knowing that the message had been received. It wasn't about yelling, or dramatics, or revenge that hurt someone physically, it was about showing him that I had claimed my life, my fortune, and my independence. When the dinner ended, I left calmly, smiling inwardly. Ryan remained at the table, stunned, trying to make sense of what had happened. The justice wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, it was quiet, inevitable, and undeniable. The audience can picture the moment perfectly, the tables had turned completely. Ryan's arrogance and control had been met with patience, strategy, and inner strength, leaving him powerless while Olivia stood victorious. This confrontation wasn't just a reveal of money, it was the reveal of power, self-worth, and the triumph of someone who refused to be controlled. The story had reached its climax, and the satisfaction of justice served was undeniable. After the confrontation, Ryan's arrogance completely fell apart. For the first time, he tried to manipulate me, using his usual charm and excuses, but it didn't work. I saw right through him, and nothing he said could shake the confidence I had built. Every attempt he made only showed me how powerless he really was. I made it clear there would be no reconciliation, no second chances, and no further interaction. I didn't need to explain myself in detail, my boundaries were firm, and I wasn't going to let anyone cross them again. I felt a quiet strength in asserting what was mine, my life, my choices, my happiness. As the days went by, I reflected on everything I had learned. Love isn't about control or greed. Trust is fragile and must be earned, not assumed. Most importantly, self-worth is something no one else can take from you, and it isn't measured by wealth or approval. These lessons had been harsh, but they shaped me into someone who could finally stand tall, free from fear or dependence on anyone. Friends and family noticed the change too. They saw a woman who had been hurt but refused to be broken. They saw someone who had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and manipulation, yet emerged stronger and wiser. Their admiration and support reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that I had built a life based on my own strength rather than anyone else's approval. Ryan, on the other hand, was left isolated. His attempts to control me and the world around him had failed completely. The confidence he once flaunted, the arrogance he carried like armor, was gone. He was humbled in the quietest but most complete way, and he knew it. The power he thought he had was nothing compared to the independence I had claimed for myself. Through it all, I felt a deep sense of relief. The fear, uncertainty, and hurt that had once weighed me down were gone. I felt empowered, knowing I could face the world on my own terms. I had closure, not through revenge, not through confrontation alone, but through living fully, standing firm, and refusing to let anyone diminish me again. The emotional fallout wasn't loud or dramatic, it was personal, quiet, and complete. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my happiness. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. The lessons, the heartbreak, and the triumph had all led me here. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving, and nothing Ryan or anyone else could do would change that. Life after Ryan felt like a fresh start, a chance to finally live on my own terms. I poured my energy into things I had always dreamed of: philanthropy, supporting causes I cared about, and helping others in ways I never had before. I also launched new ventures, investing in businesses that excited me and reflected my values. Every decision I made reminded me that my life was now fully mine to shape. I focused on my personal happiness too. I traveled freely, explored new passions, and spent time with people who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. I discovered a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known was possible. The pain from betrayal and heartbreak became a quiet guide, teaching me how to recognize my worth and protect it fiercely. Looking back, I realized that true power isn't about money or status, it comes from self-respect, patience, and the quiet confidence to let life unfold on your terms. Revenge isn't always loud or cruel, sometimes it's as simple as living fully and proving to yourself that no one can take away what you've earned or deserve. The strength I gained from betrayal became my foundation, my secret weapon, and my source of freedom. Friends and family who had witnessed my journey saw the change clearly. They saw a woman who had faced manipulation and heartbreak yet refused to be defeated. The admiration in their eyes reminded me that the hardest battles often lead to the greatest growth, and that reclaiming your life can be the most satisfying victory of all. I often reflect on how far I've come and the lessons I've learned. Trust must be earned, boundaries must be respected, and self-worth can never be compromised. Betrayal, while painful, can be a powerful teacher. It shows you who you are, how strong you can be, and what you're truly capable of achieving when you refuse to let someone else define your life. And as for Ryan, he remains a part of my past, a reminder of what I overcame. He tried to control me, to leave me with nothing, and for a moment, he believed he had succeeded. But life had a different plan, one that gave me everything I deserved. I faced betrayal, heartbreak, and manipulation, but in the end, I stood stronger, freer, and happier than I ever imagined possible. He tried to leave me with nothing, but I inherited everything I deserved. For anyone listening, I hope my story inspires reflection. Think about the ways betrayal or hardship in your own life might be guiding you toward unexpected strength. Remember that empowerment doesn't always come from confrontation or revenge, it often comes from patience, strategy, and the courage to reclaim your own life. Life can turn in the most surprising ways, and sometimes, the person who tries to break you is the very reason you discover how unbreakable you are.